What is happening, guys? Cody Plays here, bringing you another Yugioh match duel video. And in today's video, I'm going to be doing a tier list for the current metagame post the October 28th, 2022 ban list. And it's kind of unfortunate that I just did a tier list about a week ago, and then right afterwards a new ban list dropped. But there's more content for me to make, more reasons for me to talk about the metagame, which I am totally cool with. So I don't think the ban list is going to have significant changes for the tier list for the metagame, but I do think there is going to be a few things that get changed here. So without further ado, let's jump right on in. As always, this is going to be from a tournament perspective, so it's going to be a tier list for tournament play, not necessarily ladder play, but more often than not, what wins in tournaments will do good on ladder. So we got 5 categories to talk about today. We got meta defining, tier 2, tier 3, rogue, and need support / buff. Meta defining, these are the decks that define the meta as the section reads. These are decks that are going to be, these are decks you have to prepare for. If you're not prepared for them, you're going to see them, and you're going to probably lose to them. Tier 2 are decks that there's a good chance you're going to see them, but even if you aren't necessarily prepared specifically for those matchups, you can still win, but they're still very strong. Tier 3, you're not going to see these very much, but if you do, you should know how to play against them because they are very good. Rogue, you're very rarely going to see these, but when you do, they can sneak up on you, whether you're playing a meta deck or another rogue deck. Need support / buff is exactly what it sounds like, guys. These are decks that need something to come off the ban list, or we need future support from sets. So without further ado, let's jump right on in with 8 Axes. This is the epitome of a rogue deck. This is basically a blind going second deck that in best of 1 is really scary, in best of 3 is not. Because once you lose to it once, you're not going to lose to it the same way again. And that's kind of the biggest problem with this deck. It's great in best of 1s. It's great in best of 1 tournaments. It tops a lot of them. It wins a lot of them, but it doesn't do good in best of 3s. So I think Rogue's a great place for it. ABC, it's exactly where it was in the last tier list. It needs support. It needs the Therion cards to come out, and once that happens, we'll be able to have a better conversation about this deck. Emancipator, I still think this is a tier 3 deck. It has not performed like a tier 3 deck, so my bias is probably coming in here a little bit. But what this deck brings to the table, it's got such a high ceiling, and it has just so many great applications that I don't see how it isn't a tier 3 deck. It's got the ability to play through so much and establish so much going first or second. And on top of that, it just got a buff. Roxy's come into 3, gave it another starter, it gave it another extender. So overall, Emancipator, I think it's a tier 3 strategy. Altergeist, this deck's been getting worse and worse since the Multi-Faker came to 2. So much so that I think it's now a rogue deck. Well, it was always a rogue deck in my opinion, but it was a higher tier rogue deck than it is currently. Not as many people are playing it, and not as many people are winning with it for it to be considered anything higher than rogue. Middle of the pack, to be honest. Armed Dragon, this needs something. It needs buff. It needs more cards to come out, or Dragon Rulers to come off the ban list. I don't know. It needs something, but it's in a pretty bad spot right now. Agnister. I think this is definitely a tier 3 deck. I think if anything, it just got better with the ban list, not worse by any means. But I don't think it's the best cyber strategy. It still has the ability to make a towers, which is insane. It's got the ability to play for a long time in OTK. So it's got stuff going for it, but I don't think it's the best cyber strategy. B-Troopers, I think this is still a rogue deck. The DPE and Adventure hits still hurt this deck significantly, but having the ability to search max C and have a light floodgate in the form of retaliating C makes this deck competitive, makes it a rogue deck in my opinion. Birds, well, I'll call it what it really is. It's Tri-Brigade Lyrilusk. It's not Bird Up. I know that's kind of a stupid name, so I'm going to acknowledge that. It's kind of a dumb name. It's a Tri-Brigade Lyrilusk. This was a tier 2 deck. But with the recent buffs / nerf to the metagame, I think this is going to fall down to tier 3. The reason being is because this has a fantastic Sword Soul matchup. With Sword Soul getting nerfed, Sword Soul's not necessarily going to get worse, but other decks are going to get better, which means the representation of Sword Soul is going to diminish a little bit, which means the success of Birds might fall down a little bit. So that's my logic, and I think this is probably where it's going to fall, but, I could be wrong. It could still be a tier 2 deck, but I'm going to put it at tier 3. Sidra, guys, this deck has been surprising me week after week, and I've been saying it needs support, and it does. It really does. It needs support, but it's still performing. I'm like, dang, this deck top 16 yesterday, a branded Cyber Dragon list topped, and I was like, okay, cool. A branded Cyber Dragon top 8 at a tournament a few weeks ago. Okay, cool, fine. I'll give respect where respect is due, and Cydra's been actually doing okay. Dark Magician. It's so sad. This deck's not good. It's so depressing, but maybe one day it will. Copium. That's so sad. Anyways, moving on to Thunder Dragons. I think Thunder Dragons are a rogue deck. I was super high on this deck at the beginning of the format, like when Despia first came out, but it's since then just completely fallen off. It's won a tournament. It won one tournament like last week or a few weeks ago. But other than that, it doesn't do anything, it doesn't seem like. And when I'm building a deck, like when I'm building a Despia deck, I look at the different engines that I can put into it, and I'm like, okay, why would I put the Thunder Dragons in over something else? Like over more branded cards or over more Despia cards. And I can't find a good reason to do that. Like, yeah, Colossus is cool. Yeah, Titan's cool. But is it really better than making some of the Despia plays that you'd be making? Not necessarily. It's just, it's not as consistent, and the ceiling is not that much higher for it to be better than standard Despia, in my opinion. But moving on to Triple D. I think this is a really good combo deck, but I think it's a good combo deck, but I don't think it's a great combo deck. It's such a cool deck, and I like that it's so unique, but it doesn't have enough success. It doesn't succeed enough in the metagame for it to be anything more than rogue, in my opinion. Usually one person is doing good with this, and that's about it. Sometimes there will be like a second person that does good, but usually it's just like one dude that just tops consistently with DDD, and like I think that's more of a tribute to how good of a player he is than the deck necessarily, but I could be wrong. And this could be a tier 3 deck, but I'm sleeping on it, so I don't know. I'm going to put it at rogue. Despia is still meta defining, guys. This is still the best deck, if not the second best, if not the best deck in the game. It didn't lose anything. It lost to one opening. Okay. Well, now instead of playing 44 cards, play 43 cards, or play 42 cards, play 41 cards, whatever. The deck is still incredibly consistent. It's still incredibly powerful. It can still establish exactly what it did before, and nothing really changed. You know, it just honestly just made deck building a little bit simpler for the deck, which I would still take the 3 opening over that, but it doesn't need it, and it's kind of crazy to me that they thought that would be a good enough consistency hit for this deck. This deck got off the easiest of any deck that got nerfed, in my opinion. Dinos. I still think Dinos are tier 3. This deck is great right now. It's great against Sword Soul because of Token Collector. It's good against the Adventure stuff because of Token Collector. It's good against Despia because of Misk. Overall, it's great. I think a going second, maybe stun variant, like control variant against the anti-meta version of Dinos could be really cool. But regardless of how you play it, it's been succeeding, and I think it's deserving of a tier 3 spot still. Dragon Link, this is going to be tier 2 in my book. I think you can make the argument this is meta defining because it won yesterday's tournament. I actually won yesterday's tournament, the DMC Meta Weekly with Dragon Link. And I won because of this deck being so good, not because of me. I was playing terrible yesterday. I was making a lot of misplays, especially in the top 8. I played terrible in the top 8. If anyone watched it, the new timer in the game has been very difficult to play a deck like this under, because we now have 100 less seconds to play, and it's very hard to break boards in that amount of time when you're trying to play through a bunch of disruptions, but that's another video for another day. But I was just making mistake after mistake, and like every time I would make one mistake, I would just get in my head more and more and more and just make more mistakes, because there's so many different lines of play that you can go with in this deck that it's so difficult sometimes. But despite that, I was able to pull out a win and win the tournament with this. I think it's without a doubt one of the best decks in the game, and I think you can make the argument that it's a meta-defining deck, but I'm going to keep it at tier 2 because it's still not being played very much. But the people who are playing it are seeing great success with it. Heroes, this is a rogue deck. Ending on a Nibiru token is not good enough in this current format. Honestly, any format, and that's kind of what heroes do best. So moving on to Drytron. Yeah, no, I'm just kidding. Heroes, they have a lot going for them. Dark Law's really good. Dark Law's a really cool card. Being able to hard make DPE is great. But overall, it's just missing stuff, and I don't know what it is exactly. I don't know what they could do to fix this deck. Moving on to Drytron, though. Drytron's still a tier 3 deck. This deck didn't get better or worse, in my opinion. It just stayed the same. I think the other decks getting nerfed might be a bit of a buff to it, but not that much. The deck, Drytron really only loses it to itself. Really, like, not really. I mean, it loses to Maxi, but he really, like, if Drytron draws good, like, Drytron just wins. Right? So, you know, it loses to the coin flip more than anything else. I should say that. So, and that didn't change with the ban list. Earth Machine. This was requested in the last video that I talk about this, and sadly, this needs support. It's a really interesting deck. It's got the ability to place some floodgates, if that's what you want to go with. But the main problem with this is that it doesn't really do anything under Maxi. Like, it needs so many summons to do so little that it just struggles. It just struggles against Maxi, and that's like the problem with so many of these like miscellaneous like rogue / like bad combo decks. And this is not necessarily a combo deck, I would say, but I think it just struggles with Maxi too much to be anything more than rogue right now, or any more than needs support right now, because this deck's not even at full potential yet. Right? We're still waiting on the Therion stuff. And when the Therion stuff comes out, you're going to have access to an Omni Negate and Regula in the form of Regulus, and that's going to be a significant upgrade for this deck. So maybe then we could see it creep into the rogue category, but until then, we'll just wait for the Regulus, and then we'll talk about Earth Machine. That's kind of my stance on it. Eldritch, this is just a very clear rogue deck. It's got... I thought it might be tier 3 with Fluenderies coming back into the meta full force, but with the Flu nerf, it's not going to be as good, and like Eldritch is not great against a lot of other decks in the format, so I think it's just rogue. I mean, it still has floodgates, like, yeah, cool, but I don't know. It struggles. I think it's best played with like Despia in it, but when you do that, it just loses to hand traps then, so it's just a worse version of Despia, and I'm like, okay, whatever. But yeah, Eldritch has been on a roller coaster of a ride in Master Duel, and now that floodgates are getting hit, I'd like to see him bring Conquistador back, because the Eldritch engine itself didn't do anything wrong. The floodgates did stuff wrong. Moving on to Endymion. This deck, I don't want to be rude, but this deck kind of sucks. Like, this deck needs so much to play, and is like so inconsistent and so just high risk, high reward, that it's not worth playing this over something like Drytron. But if you're trying to like see success, I mean, it's a fun deck. Don't get me wrong, it's a fun deck, but it's just not very good. It's not the best pendulum strategy, so take that for what you will. Fluenderies, this deck's absolutely meta defining, guys. No matter, like, I was wrong in the last video. I said this was a tier 2 deck in the last video, but I was incorrect. Advent changed everything. It made the deck so much more consistent to the point where it is meta defining. If you are not prepared for Fluenderies, you are going to lose to it, like almost 100%. The deck is too consistent now for it not to be considered meta defining. And even with the map hit, it's still insane. It's still really good. So, yeah, I don't think there's much to say other than that. Like, this deck's insane. I think everyone knows that too. Invoked. This is a mediocre Despia branded strategy. I think it's worse than branded Thunder Dragons. I think it's worse than branded Despia. Alistair, normal summon Alistair is cool, but it's not that great right now. Madolche. Madolche's a rogue deck. I think most of the time when this deck tops, it's because the player, not the deck. There's like 2 or 3 really good players that play Madolche, and they consistently do good with it. But other than that, like, the deck it's okay. It's decent. It's all around. It's got applications in the current meta, but it's not. It loses to one disruption too hard, I think, to be considered anything more than rogue. Marincess. I think this is slightly better than Adagnister, but I think it's kind of right here at the same level with Adagnister. It's better than Adagnister because I think it can because of having the ability to make Toad and play around Nibiru a little bit. It's also better because it recurs follow-up, I think, a little bit better than Adagnister. It can still make the same towers-like effect, but it also just has more diverse interruptions. And it combos better, more consistently off of one card than Adagnister does. Usually Adagnister takes 2. But to make like the full towers, right? To like the 6k towers. Numerons, it's right here with 8 axis. It's just a random rogue deck that can catch you off guard in best of 1s or in game 1 of best of 3. Outside of that, it's not very good. Orchist. Sadly, this is still in the need support category because we do not have Girsu or Galatea at more than 1. They gave us Harport, and that's not what we needed. So sad. But currently in its form, this deck getting put into it, it's not a deck by itself. It's not a pure deck. Orchist is not a pure deck, at least a real one. Sadly, I want it to be, but it's not. It doesn't perform. When it gets put into decks like Phantom Knights or Spiral, it's interesting, but it doesn't make those decks better. It just makes them different. So an engine should make a deck better, and this doesn't necessarily do that. So sadly, it just needs support. Then we got Pins and Magicians. Guys, I don't know where to put this on the tier, within the tier 3, but it's a tier 3 deck. Still, like, I put it on tier 3 in my last list, and it still is. It's performing. It topped last night. It tops in yesterday's tournament, the DMC Meta Weekly 35. It topped. It got top 16. I played against it in top 16. It was my buddies. And he did great with it. The biggest problem with this deck is the fact that it's so tight. Like, the deck is so jam-packed full of engine cards that it doesn't have enough room to play hand traps. He was playing 3 hand traps in his deck, and that's simply not enough. Like, that's simply just not enough hand traps to, like, consistently win. But despite that, it's still good. It's still a great deck, and it's really, really good going first. It's scary going first. Yeah. Phantom Knights. This is absolutely meta-defining deck. As soon as Scales came back, I was like, Phantom Knights are going to be good. Because Phantom Knights were already good. That's the thing. This deck was already insane, but people were sleeping on it. It was topping tournaments left and right with barely anybody playing it. And it's just insane. It's got, like, making Scythe on turn 1 is absolutely ridiculous. It's so insane to be able to do that. It's very consistent. Can play a lot of hand traps. Can play great engine cards. It can grind almost forever. Overall, Phantom Knights have so much going for it in the current metagame, and it should be considered a meta-defining deck, because if you're not prepared for this, you are going to lose to it. Prank Kids. Guys, this is a rogue deck, and last time in the last video, someone commented and said, bro, you're crazy. This is not a rogue deck. Guys, it is. It's a rogue. Like, there's very little, I think, that you can argue against that. The deck has got 1 Meow, like the hit Adventure engine, the hit to DPE engine, the Celestial Band is huge, the hit to Fusion Destiny is huge. It doesn't end on a lot anymore. It ends on maybe a Griffin and 1 Butler or DPE. All these meta decks can play through that. All of them can. Like, or at least almost all of them. Like, not always, but generally speaking, they can all play through that. It's way different than Double Butler. It's 2 Raigekis is way different than 1 Raigeki, right? Draw 2 and a reoccurring DPE is way better than just a recurring DPE. It's just a different deck now, and it's not as strong going first as it once was. And that's huge. It feels weak to play. It feels weak to play against. Not to mention the Adventure hit is, like, really, really big, making it more or less consistent. You can't chain block as well in the deck, and that's what made the deck tier 1. Overall, this deck, it performs like a rogue deck. Honestly, it performs like it needs support. It doesn't perform at all. It hasn't topped a tournament in over a month. The last time it topped a tournament was when Enchantress was at 2, and that's not a real format anymore. So in the current format, this deck is terrible. But despite that, I still think Griffin plus Butler or Griffin plus DPE is good enough to win games. So it's good enough, it's good enough to sometimes win games, or at least keep you in the game long enough to win a grind game. But it's not good enough to consistently just FTK your opponent, which most of these other decks can just set up an FTK, right? I don't know. It's hard because, like, I think people are overhyping a deck like this. But moving on to Salad. Guys, this deck's good. This deck's really good. This deck, it just got better with the nerfs to everything else. It just got Heat Soul, which is obviously a huge buff, and a lot of the other decks that were better than it just got nerfed. Phantom Knights is the only one that became more powerful. So this getting, like, basically being, like, indifferent to the ban list is only a benefit to it. It combos very well off 1 or 2 cards. It can play going first, it can play going second, it can OTK like it's no one's business, it can play 15 hand traps in the main board, it can play Floodgates, it can play Baguska, it can play Gozen Match, so on and so forth. Like, it's got a lot going for it. And I think it's without a doubt a tier 2 deck. It top 4'd yesterday's tournament, and I think that's a great indicator for where it's going to be in the meta. Should all variants right here with Invoked, they're just in a bad place right now because Max C does what Winda does, but every deck can play it, and Despia just establishes better boards and is more consistent. So, Striker, I think Striker's pretty interesting. I was pretty down on it in my review for the ban list, but I think it's going to be better than it was before. I think previously I had it worse than like B-Troopers and stuff like that, but I think it might be better now. 3 Widow Anchors is going to make the deck more consistent. It means your Shiz searches at the end phase are going to be able to search other things, better follow-up. It means your multi-roll is going to be better because you're going to have 3 Widow Anchors for a cycle, so you really have like 6 Widow Anchors, which is kind of crazy. It's just going to overall make the deck better. You know, there's no way around it. But it doesn't address the core problems of Striker, and that's the fact that Kagari's at 1. Like, you know, Kagari being at 1 really sucks. I would take 1 Engage and 3 Kagaris any day of the week, like TCG has, over what we currently have. But we do have Kaiser Coliseum here, and that's kind of an insane card. But we don't have Mine, which Mine is really good in this deck, but, you know, it's a whole different format. Not even talking about that. Like, Kaiser Coliseum is really, really good, and this deck can play it, which makes it good. Speedroid, I put this in Rogue last week, just to, honestly, because I think it's interesting, but I think it needs support, really. Its best card is limited to 1 because of other decks. Because it's better in other decks than it is in Speedroid. So it's a combo deck. It's a wild combo deck that can still make a Rorodon, which is super cool, but it's just, it loses to Max C super hard. It loses to itself. It needs some support. Let's be honest here. Spellbook. This is the same exact situation as Orcust, in my opinion. I think these are basically the same thing. Not that they do the same thing, but they're both currently engines that can go into decks that aren't making those decks better. Does Spellbook Striker really make Striker better? Like, does it really? Nah, maybe. Does Spellbook Endymion really make Endymion better? Maybe. Probably not. Does Orcust Fan Knight make Orcust better, or does Fan Knight better? No. So, like, I guess it's slightly better than the Orcust stuff currently, but I don't know. I think it just needs support. It's just not a real deck right now. And I hope they release some support in the future for it. Spirals. I think it's a tier 2 deck. Still, it's topped yesterday. It's been consistently topping. It's just going to get better over time, but of course we're not talking about that. We're not talking about Illusion of Chaos coming into the game necessarily, but when that happens, this deck will be great. But until then, it's still going to be like a very solid, well-rounded tier 2 combo deck. I don't think it's as good as Dragon Link or Salad, but I think it's better than the Drytron and stuff like that, because it just can combos more consistently and plays through more than those decks do. Swordsoul Tinny. This is absolutely a meta-defining deck. This is one of the best decks in the game, if not the best deck in the game. Despite Longyan coming to 2, which only hurts consistency slightly, it makes it makes the deck more prone to Nibiru. It makes the deck more prone to not getting Protos or Blackout at the end. But despite that, it's still hyper consistent. It also makes Pot of Desire slightly worse, but that's overestimated in my opinion. The deck's great. Protos is like one of the best cards in the game, and I don't know how Protos survived the ban list, but it did, and here we are. To be honest, like, look at the top decks. Sets up a Floodgate, Protos. Sets up Scythe, Floodgate. Sets up Barrier Statue, then Ryza. Floodgate, and then stack your deck. Yeah, Floodgates are kind of impressive. Now, Despia is the only one that's, like, quote-unquote fair, in my opinion. But these Floodgate decks, they're insane, and you gotta be prepared for them. I think they should hit that stuff, but they decided to go for consistency instead, which is fine. Moving on to Tri-Brigade. I think it's slightly worse than Salad right now, because Salad's like a little bit more consistent, I want to say. That might be bold, but this is going to be Tri-Brigade variants such as like pure Tri-Brigade, branded Tri-Brigade, Tri-Zoo, stuff like that. I think they all kind of equate to the same thing in the current format. Like, they all perform about at the same level, and you can't really go wrong with any of those lists. preferably you'd go with like Branded or Zoo, not Pure. Pure's not that great anymore. So this is more like Pure not Pure. This is more like Branded and Zoo, but nevertheless, the point doesn't really change. This deck can play like a lot of hand traps. It's pretty good going second. It's got the ability to make some insane boards, almost unbreakable boards, and it can establish just very diverse interruptions. Like, what more could you really want in a deck? It's very consistent. It's got a great grind game. It's overall just really well rounded, and I think Tier 2 is a great place for it. I think its only terrible matchup on this list is Despia, and that's because Despia can establish a floodgate for them, like a direct floodgate for them in the form of a Zombie World. But that's only going to be in best of 3 side deck scenarios anyways. So, yep. Moving on to Umi Control. This deck is weird. It's good. It can establish some really cool floodgates, but I don't think it's as good as some of the other control decks in the game. I would rather play Eldritch, I would rather play Striker, I'd rather play Floowandereeze, to be honest with you. It's not great going first. It's great going first. It's not great going second. Surgical Kaiju's really cool, but it's not enough for this deck to be like great, right? I think in best of 3 it's really going to struggle, especially when Red Reboots get sided in, when Twins get sided in, when Cosmics gets, well, not necessarily Twin Twister because C-Cell attack protects against that, but like Cosmic Cyclone's great against it. Yeah. Overall, it's just, and also, like, what happens if you play against Marincess? Like, Marincess is a real deck. Like, what happens when you play against that? Like, it kind of just destroys it. So, but overall, I think this is just a middle of the pack control deck. Very interesting, but not that great. Virtual World kind of sucks, sadly. I love this deck. I think it's such a cool deck without VFD. But with VFD, like, well, you know, it's so hard. I don't know. I think all these other decks are just slightly better than it. Like, you might be able to say that it's better than Madolche. I don't know. It'd be hard to, like, it's hard. Like, these decks are also similar, like, in their power level, in my opinion. So anywhere that these are, just take it with a grain of salt, because it's so hard to rank these. But Virtual World, it still has the same problems. Roshi coming back to 3 does not really solve its consistency. It's still hyper inconsistent. It still needs a lot of cards to play efficiently, and its inboards are not that great. It's got good follow-up, I'll give you that. It can play around a lot, but it doesn't end on the best, and it just doesn't do enough in the current format. So take it with what you will, but I think Rogue is a good place for VW. Zephyra, this is just another high-risk, high-reward pendulum deck that's not as good as Pin Magicians. It's really interesting, but it's just not very good. It's just super fun to play, super fun to watch, but too inconsistent and like high roll to be considered good. Zodiac. I think Zodiac is a top-of-the-line rogue deck, but nothing more. Someone in the comment section last video said this is a tier 2 deck. So what that's telling me is that this deck is better than Drytron, Birds, Barensis, all the cyber strategies, Dinos, Pin Magicians, Adamancipator. It's better than all those decks. And I'm going to counter that point by saying why? How? Zodiac's only really a going second deck, because going first it doesn't establish anything. It makes a Drident and passes, right? You might make a Utopic Future, but at the best. And then have some hand traps. That's not a good end board. So it plays going second because of that. And then its goal is to one-card Zeus you. Okay, cool. Well, what happens if you run into a Mirror Jade? What happens if you run into a Revolt? What happens if you run into a Barrier Statue? I don't know. Nothing. You don't do anything. Because the deck can't do anything. The meta does not... This is not a good meta for a deck like that. This is not a good meta for a deck that can only normal summon, and then if its normal summon gets disrupted, it's game over. It's not good in that. So because of that, I think this is a rogue deck. It just eats Sword Soul for breakfast. It absolutely dominates the Sword Soul matchup. And I think that's what keeps this deck relevant. But other than that, It hard loses to Despia, Mirror Jade. It hard loses to a DPE in Fan Rights. It hard loses to a Ryza. It hard loses to Dragon Lake because they have Seal. They also have Tidying. They also have IP into Unicorn. They also have Snow. It hard loses to, well, I guess it doesn't necessarily hard lose to Salad, because Salad might not put up a disruption immediately. They might put up a negate, not a disruption, but they can also put up the trap card that pops instead of negates. So it depends on what they're going for. It hard loses to Revolt. It hard loses to Spiral because they put up Sleeper. That's just the tier 1 and tier 2 decks. All of them beat it. Easy. But this guy was trying to say that it's a tier 2 deck. I don't think so. I don't think it can be considered that good because it's just not consistently able to do that. Now, the ability to play 20 to 25 hand traps is great. The ability to play Zeus is great. The ability to play Mega Clops is great. But not enough, in my opinion, to make this deck any more than Rogue. But anyways, guys, that is going to do it for me. Thank you guys so much for tuning into the video. Please, leave a like, subscribe if you enjoyed the video, if you enjoy the content, and also leave a comment down below, what I got right, what I got wrong, and what videos you'd like to see from me in the future. But yeah, thank you again so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Have a great rest of your day. Peace.